Welcome to Take Two, the show that we do after the 9. It's here on KTVU, and you can find it, well, you found it already. So today we're going to be talking about some of the items that we had on the 9 and throughout the morning, including what's next for Oakland. I think a lot of people are concerned, and rightfully so, that the city is on the wrong track. And my colleague Gasia got to talk to the interim mayor. And also, we've been talking about what's next for Oakland. I heard a question that really piqued my interest. You asked him about the waterfront hotel.
Right.
Because no one wants to see a hotel go away,
right.
Jack London Square. And can you tell us more about what he said? What do you think is going to happen to revitalize not only that, but the rest of the city?
Well, you have to realize Kevin Jenkins, he was the head of District 6. He was interim mayor of Oakland for a very short time. He is now handing over the reins to a very experienced politician. I don't know that he has advice for Barbara Lee, given all the decades that she spent serving her community, but he definitely said that Oakland has a perception problem. And when you talk about the closing of the Waterfront Hotel, which is just down the street here, Oakland, Jack London Square, where, I could easily walk there in 10 minutes. I've done it 100 times. He talked about that perception problem. When it comes to businesses, a major thing like a hotel closing, that's tourism dollars, that's restaurant dollars, that's nightlife dollars, that's money that's not going to be coming to Oakland anymore. He also focused on, because I asked him, the issue of crime in Oakland. And even though the city is enjoying a drop in the overall crime rate, if we look at 2025 numbers compared to the same first quarter of 2024, overall crime, the number of reported crimes is down 37%. That sounds great, right? However, you still have a number of high-profile crimes making news, not just in the news that we bring you every day, but talk among Oaklanders. Most recently, there was a shooting at the restaurant Pierre. It's an upscale, it's a Black-owned restaurant, and I say that because its creators made a point of saying, we could have set this up anywhere. We wanted to invest in Oakland. We're in downtown Oakland and proud of it. But in video taken by the owner of Pierre shortly after the shooting the next day, he was like, Oakland, why are you doing this to us? So when we talked about that with the mayor, he said that the shooting, though it happened inside the restaurant, in the mayor's view, it had nothing to do with Oakland. And I said, so why do people feel free to come into Oakland and do this kind of criminal activity? Do you think people think they won't get caught? And he said, yeah, I think there is that perception. So that's something else that he and every other Oaklander hopes that the incoming mayor works on.
I think that a lot of people would disagree. This has nothing to do with Oakland, because if I'm taking my family out to dinner in Oakland, I don't want this to happen. And one of the ways that this can be prevented from happening, a lot of people think, is more public safety. Maybe that means more police, whatever it means. This does not happen as much in other cities, and some people are questioning. What you said about Barbara Lee is on point. However, she has been a legislator, not an executive. So I think that the interim mayor could give her some advice. As young as he is and as veteran as she is, she's been a legislator her whole life. This is the first time she's going to be an executive. It's a different job, isn't it?
It is. But, she's been living in Oakland this whole time. So she has said, and we've had the, chance to talk with her many times in the recent run-up to her taking over the mayor's spot. She says, I've lived in Oakland. I've felt everything that Oaklanders talk about on the news. She, too, is frustrated about the state of public safety. She, too, is frustrated to hear that businesses are being broken into repeatedly. It's a broken record. The business is broken into, that the store owner calls 911, officers take a while to show up, the store owner is frustrated and saying, I don't know how much longer I can continue doing business in this town because the costs are, through the roof, and I'm worried for the safety of my workers. So Barbara Lee has been living here, living that, while she's been doing the work of being a representative.
You and Andre talk to the mayors rather regularly, all of them.
Every month.
Every month.
At least.
So, and more, you're right. So have you noticed a pattern since the pandemic that certain cities have recovered better than others? And why, since you talk to these people every month, some cities arguably are doing better than others. And have you noticed any pattern?
It's interesting. I focus on what needs work because that's what impacts people most. I think all three major cities, San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, are struggling because of not enough people going back to the office. That lack of, I'm going to buy a sandwich, I'm going to drop off my dry cleaning, I'm going to go out with friends for drinks after dinner. All that money that's pumped into, let's just say, San Francisco, if I work in the financial district, that goes to feed the city, which in turn can then hire more police police officers, do better street cleaning. So I think the return to office, it was a total boon. And you know this, you were one of the first people here at KTVU to work from home back in March of 2020.
Correct.
Because the Bay Area was so ready, we all had internet connection, we had laptops and this and that. The other thing, we worked from home, those of us who were privileged enough to do so, pretty much without any major reconfiguration. That, however, is now biting cities, including the three biggest here in the Bay Area, because people aren't back at the office, and that money isn't flowing into the cities, and all three major cities are having trouble hiring and retaining officers, keeping business. I mean, how many retail store closures have we reported on in San Francisco? Right. You know, San Jose, I think, tends to do a little bit better when it comes to the perception of crime, perhaps only because it's not on the same national lens as Oakland and San Francisco.
I think you're right about that. I think that San Jose gets grouped in with Silicon Valley, and it is known for something else.
Yes.
And even if there certainly is crime in San Jose, we've talked about it, but what comes to mind when you think of San Jose is Silicon Valley, President Trump's initiative to bring Silicon Valley into his administration. That's what I think of, just being the ordinary person. Mm-hmm. When I think of Oakland, I think Oakland has a public safety issue that it needs to address.
Mm-hmm. And that's the one, it's one that the governor has spoken about, you know, specifically just in recent months, saying that he would like to see OPD change its pursuit policy. Even the governor said there's a perception in Oakland that you can come in here, commit a crime, jump in your car, get away from the police, and the police won't chase you. So if I know the police won't chase me, as is the case here in Oakland, what's my motivation to do right things? So it's interesting when you have even the governor kind of calling out some of Oakland's public safety practices. We'll see if that's something the incoming mayor works on.
You know, as you know, I sit in the traffic center when I'm not doing this for the first 4 hours. I have Oakland radios on, and I hear pursuits being abandoned. I've always thought, and I hear other cities not abandoning them. Now, I'm not going to make a judgment because pursuits can be dangerous. They can hurt people.
Even deadly.
Right? So there has to be a balance. Oakland almost gets rid of pursuits almost immediately. I just noticed that from just observing. So maybe that will change.
Right, that's their policy. So again, like you said, we'll see if that changes. But you know, you asked about what's working. I will have to take a very long view, and I would love to highlight a city we really haven't talked about yet, and that's the city of Richmond. 20 years ago when I started here at KTVU, Richmond was consistently at or near the top of the most violent cities in the United States. Richmond had a problem. Richmond went through a couple of police chiefs. They had a few very high-profile public safety, you know, crises, called in the CHP. Richmond has largely turned itself around. It's taken 20 years, right? But now there's a lot to be celebrated about Richmond, as there was even back in those difficult days. So, you know, Richmond is smaller than Oakland, San Jose, and San Francisco, but they have definitely, they're no longer at or near the top of those most dangerous
Richmond and East
lists.
Palo Alto, when I came here, were always in the news for, you know, it was kind of notorious, right?
Homicides, gang activity, yep,
Right.
absolutely.
One of the other stories we've been covering this morning, James Torres was on a story about VTA using some of its land to build 130 apartments, up to 3 bedrooms for lower income renters. It's the first project like this in the Bay Area in years. Fruitvale Village comes to mind. I was out there as a reporter when that went up. That was, I don't know how long ago that was, but it's right next to transit, which means that some of these low-income people may not even need a car to get to work. It's exactly what urban planners have been thinking about for years. Even back when I was in college, took an urban planning course, and they were talking about developments, Gasia, that were next to transit so that there'd be infill and fewer cars, that whole thing. It's finally beginning, I think, here in 2025, beginning to happen.
And what's interesting is that about half of these units of the 130 are going to be set aside as rapid rehousing, and that's meant to move families quickly out of homelessness and into stable shelter. So that's very important, because a lot of people, we talk about perception, right, in the last segment. A lot of people think of San Jose, Silicon Valley, you know, 24-year-old millionaires running around, and there is certainly that element, but you also have many, many families who are struggling to the point where they don't have stable housing. And so for this to be a new development, the first of its kind in 25 years, with 67 out of 130 units set aside for rapid rehousing, you know, getting that secure housing is so often such a critical step in helping to improve, your life, that of your family. You know, many people say, you're telling me to get a job. How do I get a job if I don't have an address? How can my kid go to school if she doesn't have a bed to sleep in? You know, you hear these stories in every school district, children sleeping in cars, being bounced from, their aunt's house to then a well-meaning neighbor's house. And, I can't say it enough. Housing is so critical. So it's good to see San Jose officials taking this major step. And hopefully, do you know the start date or when it'll be at fruition?
I do not, although James is taking a tour of some of the units today, so I think it's kind of soon. And while you're looking that up, I will mention that it seems to be related to a push that Governor Gavin Newsom is doing to quell homelessness in whichever way his administration can. There seems to be a new pressure, and yesterday we were talking about how there's less of a tolerance, I guess, for people or encampments to be blocking the street. Something needs to be done. It's a problem that has been with Governor Newsom when he was still the mayor. So I think that this is rolling downhill, so to speak. You speak with Mayor Matt Mahan on a regular basis, and whenever I hear your interviews with him and Andres too, I hear a resolve in his voice that maybe I haven't heard from previous mayors.
And Mayor Matt Mahan, well, he's new. It's interesting. And let me I actually found the answer I was looking for. People are going to start moving into those apartments down in San Jose starting in August of this year.
That's
so
close.
That's kind of toward the end of the summer.
That means they're done.
Yeah, it's in, a few months. So that's good news. That's soon. I interviewed then San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo at the beginning of his first term. And I'll never forget, I was saying, what do you want to achieve and what are your top priorities? And he said, every single day I show up to the mayor's office, the clock is ticking. And he says, I know 4 years sounds like a long time. It is an instant when it comes to pitching something, getting support for it, getting it to pass, finding the money. So there's always a time pressure for these mayors. And, and I'm sure you've seen this it's somewhat mean-spirited, but because it's illustrative, I'll share it. You have a picture of a big city mayor when they first took office and then when they're leaving office. Even remember those memes with President Obama?
Sure.
He took office and then 8 years later, you look 100 years older, right? Because you've been beaten down, you've been through the thing. Mayor Matt Mahan is still somewhat new, but he does have a lot of enthusiasm and, there's certainly a positive note in his voice. And I think a lot of people are hoping that he will deliver on his goals, among them reducing homelessness in the city and clearing the streets of encampments, which is, kind of building on what the governor sent down yesterday.
Well, this is a political issue as well because Mayor Sam Liccardo went on to the state assembly. He was voted in, and I think that perhaps this is a little of a report card on how he did, right? And you don't know what Matt Mahan's political aspirations are, but seemingly when he's termed out, whatever he does is going to be graded, and he wants to make a dent in homelessness and transportation issues, I think.
What was interesting, since we're talking about political aspirations, I didn't want to spell it out, but since we have this extra time, I will. Going back to our live interview with the outgoing interim mayor of Oakland, Kevin Jenkins, he's going back to District 6. At the very end, I said, do you want to come back to the mayor's office? Will you run for the top seat in the state? And he said, after 10 years, once Barbara Lee is done being mayor, he thinks that she's going to serve this short 2 years, then she'll run for a full term, and then she'll run for a second full term, after which she would be termed out. She's 78 years old. So by Kevin Jenkins' math, she's going to be in office and 88 years old. The only reason I highlight this is because there is a push that we reported on last week by a San Francisco Democratic group to impose age limits for people who are in office. So, when you start talking about getting up, in the upper 80s, the early 90s, a lot of people would say, should that person still be in office? Just to hear from the outgoing mayor of Oakland, it sounds like he is more than ready to have Barbara Lee in office for 10 years, even before she takes office. That happens next Tuesday.
That might be something that he is saying as a good party candidate politically. Yes. Honestly, candidly, he might be saying that, but he may know that 88 might be a little unrealistic, and but he's certainly not going to say that to you or in public.
Right.
Hey, I'm looking to unseat Barbara Lee after she does a term.
Right.
But I get the feeling that if Barbara Lee steps down, his name would be in the ring.
Right.
I think he's done a good job communicating. I told him that after your interview was over. Whether he's done what I want or not, he's been the interim mayor, but he's very communicative, and that's something that translates well, honestly, to being a mayor of a big city.
We started this series talking to big city mayors at least once a month pretty much 10 years ago, right around the time I shifted over to Mornings on 2. And the goal was just, because you were not in the editorial meeting, the goal is that we have some of the most closely watched cities in the country here in our backyard. If someone thinks they can lead a major city, they should be able to be held accountable. The questions that we're asking are questions that we are hearing from people who live in these cities, right? It's not a game of gotcha. It's that Oaklanders are concerned about violent crime. People in San Francisco are concerned about a lack of a return to office, and therefore my parents had to shut down their sandwich shop in the financial district. So it's been such a productive series that we've been doing, like I said, for about a decade now. And every time, because we've had a lot of change, right? Every time there is a new mayor or even an interim mayor, as is the case here in Oakland with Kevin Jenkins, we reach out, say, hi, we're Channel 2. Thankfully, people know us. And we say, this is the series we've been doing with the predecessor. We would like you to continue that. We usually set forth, hey, we'll probably talk about public safety. We may also touch on the waterfront hotel closing.
They know.
They do, but nothing is off the table. And I want to really underline that, because for the most part, we have had our big city mayors show up, because you don't know what's going to happen in 3 weeks from now, right? Things could be going great, and then in 3 weeks, your city is mired in controversy, and you just don't want to even go to the grocery store, but yet you made the commitment to be on Channel 2. Right. Those mayors have shown up.
They have shown up.
And they have to face whatever questions. We have never said we will not ask about fill in the blank. We can ask about whatever we want. It's their choice to answer or not. That's the agreement.
When Mayor Sheng Tao was here, we dutifully asked about the controversy she was involved in.
Right, so, the FBI raids, the recall against her, and she's not the only mayor who has faced controversy. So it's, credit to, former mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, former Oakland mayor, Libby Schaaf. Even Sam Liccardo came to us in times of controversy. So for the most part, they show up because that's the agreement that they have made with us, and they know it would look really, really bad if we were to say we were supposed to talk with Mayor so-and-so, but she/he pulled out today, and so we're not able to ask them about fill in the blank. So just a little peek into our editorial meetings for you.
Wouldn't look politically. All right. Earlier in the 9, I did an interview with the executive director of the, I almost said Alameda, that's where I live, the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, and was talking about the history of Angel Island, how important it is, yet a lot of people don't know about it, and part of Edward Tepporn, who is our guest, talking about it is to educate people, not only that it's there, but what it means to especially the AAPI community.
That's right, Sal. For 40 years, Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation has worked in partnership with Angel Island State Park to preserve the buildings at the former U.S. Immigration Station, as well as to lift up the histories, because they're so relevant to what's happening in our country today still.
Why is it so important for people to visit in person?
There's something about being in the buildings, walking in these rooms that once were used to detain immigrants for days, weeks, months. And it's an opportunity to learn about the history where it happened, but there's more than that. You actually feel that history when you're inside these buildings.
I wanted to ask you, I didn't get to ask you on TV because our time was shorter, but is the island and the prison being just maintained or preserved, or is it being refurbished? Because there's two different things. Sometimes you just leave it the way it is and you fix problems that come up. Other times you restore it, maybe paint it over, or trying to make it the way it was. Which is it there?
So it's both. In the 1970s, there were plans to actually tear down these buildings and turn them into campsites and picnic tables. But thankfully, there was a community organizing effort that secured California Historic Landmark status, the National Historic Landmark status for the site. And so there's different buildings on the site. There's the detention barracks building, which is where men and boys were held in detention. And then that building, we've tried to preserve the building to look as close as possible to what it used to look like. And we just opened up the former hospital building to the public for the first time 3 years ago. By the time we were able to start the renovation process for that building, unfortunately, there was not much to preserve. And so that building actually provided us an opportunity to reimagine the space as a more contemporary building. And the exhibits there take the exhibits that were in the detention barracks building that talk about exclusion and detention that happened to Asian Pacific Islander communities when Angel Island was open, but draws parallels to what's happening to other communities, especially in ICE detention centers and along our southern border today.
Can we talk specifically about the experience of being Asian American in this country? At the beginning of the pandemic, Asian restaurants were the first ones to shut down because people weren't going there anymore, blaming China for COVID. People on the street here in the Bay Area were unsafe. They couldn't go about their day because they were being targeted with verbal assaults, physical assaults. And I have friends who said, I told my mom not to go to the grocery store by herself. Tell me a little bit about how that feeling still persists, even though AAPI hate is not as much in the headlines anymore. It still continues. And how you draw a direct line from what's happening in, 2025 straight back to Angel Island.
The racism and xenophobia that we've seen in recent years is not new. It traces its histories back to when immigrants first started coming to the U.S. and it's what led to the exclusionary immigration policies and to the building of Angel Island itself. I grew up in Texas in the 70s and 80s, and in that time, things like, where are you from, and where are you really from, and go back to where you came from, were phrases that we heard a lot. But we never felt unsafe the way that many Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have felt in recent years. And that feeling of unsafety, though, is connected to what many racial ethnic minority groups face. So the opportunity from learning about Angel Island's history, from learning about Black history, from learning about Latino, Latinx history, as well as Indigenous histories, is to be able to remember that these things happened. There have been times when our communities have faced injustices, and there's an opportunity to learn from those histories so that we can imagine a better future for all communities.
Are things getting better?
I hope so, but it has felt, especially like the past couple of months and the past couple of years, we've seen an increase in racism. We've seen an increase in xenophobia. For the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, we were awarded 2 federal grants, a grant from the National Endowment for Humanities, as well as a grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services that would have supported our work. But just last month, we received an email notice from the administration informing us that our grant had been abruptly terminated because we no longer aligned with the priorities of the federal government. And so in that regards, my hope is that there is opportunity for us to really come together as communities across California as well as across the US to think about why it is so important to remember histories like Angel Island and how we can potentially create more inclusive communities.
Absolutely.
The Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation is very easy to find online. I just typed it in, it came up. You go to the website, there's a tab to donate. We already put that out, but I really hope that people hearing this, especially now that your federal money may dry up, hopefully it won't, maybe there'll be a reprieve, but nevertheless, you could use all the money you can to continue your work.
We can. The work that we've done is about preserving the buildings out at Angel Island so people have the opportunity to learn about history where it happened, but it's also about ensuring that more people across the Bay Area, across California, and across the U.S. recognize that this history happened. So often when we think about immigration in the U.S., we think immediately about the Statue of Liberty and the Ellis Island Immigration Station.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us on Take Two.